Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a historical movie review, and I'll be having a look at Shadow of the Sword, which is also known as The Headsman. Now this movie was made in 2005, but it's been re-released a little more recently to coincide with Game of Thrones. Why, you may ask? Well, this movie stars Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, who you may know from said show. Now, this being a kind of medieval film and obviously starring this guy, it's obviously this is why they've kind of re-released it. But I have to say, if you are a fan of the Game of Thrones show, you may like this movie. Rather than being a sort of typical sword and sorcery action film or sort of historical action sort of film, it's more along the lines of a kind of more of a political sort of scheming, that type of thing. A lot like Game of Thrones. So there are some comparisons to be had here. Now, the basic premise of this movie really focuses around two men. Martin, played by the guy from Game of Thrones, and I think the character's name is Georg, and he's basically he's kind of lifelong friend. They've known each other since kids. Through the passage of time, Martin, played by Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, ends up getting the military, whilst Georg basically has a life in the church, and they're kind of really reunited after sort of a long time. Martin's a captain in the army, and Georg's basically sort of going up through the ranks in the church, and Martin sort of falls in love with the executioner's daughter. Now the problem here being that the church is all powerful at this sort of time in history, and anyone who they sort of deem outside what the church really permits is kind of almost deemed as a heretic. So Martin has to kind of renounce his sort of position in the military to sort of marry this the executioner's daughter, and kind of become the executioner himself. Now, from that point on, things get a little bit even more murky, as you've got kind of really the church really sort of trying to sort of keep down this sort of what they consider heretics, and basically anyone who doesn't kind of fall within the sort of the church's remit is ultimately sort of either shunned, or at worst they're kind of executed and burned at the stake and things like that. Now, you have lots of kind of double dealings, backstabbings, and kind of people serving their own agendas, and it really puts a kind of pressure between the friendship between these sort of two characters. So that's pretty much what I'll tell you about the plot here. What's the film like? Well, like I said, if you like Game of Thrones, I think you may like this movie. It kind of has that same sort of thing where everyone's kind of has their own sort of plot, and the good guys don't necessarily come out on top because they kind of are a bit more of a straight shooter, and the people who are a bit more mischievous tend to be getting the upper hand a lot of the time. So in that respect, it kind of does remind me a little bit of Game of Thrones. I have to say, it's nowhere near the sort of scale of even Game of Thrones, that being a TV show and this being a movie. The major problem I have with this film is its pacing. So it's a relatively long movie. It's kind of, it's a couple of hours long, but I think it actually needed to be a little bit longer because this has an odd sense of pacing in the fact that, for example, we're told that these guys have been friends for forever, but we have literally a couple of minutes as them as kids. We spend literally no time between the kind of conception of Martin's son to when he's born. It literally seems like it happens within minutes, whilst obviously it's happened over the course of 9 months, but other times it kind of slows down. So it has a kind of odd sense of pacing. I think a lot of that has to do with editing. And I think maybe what it could have been done, it should have been better. It's maybe two movies, sort of split into two with a little bit more sort of fleshed out, or a kind of mini-series or something along the lines of that. So as it stands at the moment, sometimes the choices in how they kind of, more of a technical situation, just doesn't seem like a particularly good storytelling device. I have to say the acting as well is okay, but there are some sort of delivery of lines which do seem kind of a little bit sort of stilted. The majority of the main cast are pretty good, but more of these sort of the extras and things like that, it just the kind of line delivery seems a little off to me. It's not a particularly bloody film, although there are lots of implied sort of tortures and things like that. You do see a couple of beheadings, but there's not a whole lot of sort of gory scenes, so to speak. But considering the title of it, I would expect to see some. However, just knowing this stuff is going on is quite gruesome. I think some people may find it a little bit dull, but like I said, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, I think you may like it because it has that sort of political sort of aspect to it, and the corruption within the sort of church. I think maybe if you're religious, you may have a problem with this because the church is really made out to be the bad guy here. You've got the Inquisition turn up, which seem, you know, obviously they are kind of particularly harsh, but basically the whole sort of church is kind of, or the majority of the church I should say, is kind of really painted here as a sort of a corrupting influence more than anything else. So I think people who have particularly religious views may not be a big fan of this movie. So it's an okay movie. I don't think it's for everyone. As I said, the technical issues really plague that. There's a couple of instances of green screen as well that's kind of fairly obvious. But overall, I was entertained with it. I thought the characters are engaging. I enjoyed watching it. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.